And like some people DNF the book because of this, but basically you find out that okay, hello, what it is, what's up, got your video in the club. Okay, so welcome back everyone. If you don't know who I am Slow Reader. It's been a hot second. You are also not centered, and I don't know what madness is happening with my camera. What it is, what's up, got your video in the club. Okay, welcome back. My name is Brianna, aka Slow Reader. Welcome back to my channel. There's some new stuff going on. I have a makeup look. You can't quite see it and it's not perfect, but like, you know, I tried to do something orange and like I'm still practicing my makeup look. I'm getting there, y'all, right? It's probably easier if I just take off my glasses so you can see like what the attempt, right? The attempt. That was the attempt. I'm getting better. I'm still like a beginner at makeup, but yeah. Anyway, you don't care. I also have new glasses, which are now anti-glare, so you can actually kind of see my eyes a little bit more. But yeah, if you're new to my channel, welcome. You should know that I am inconsistent with posting. I will leave you and I will forsake you and that is okay. And you know what? That's just how it is. They're gonna be like, why do you move around so much? So if you're new here, I basically do book reviews and commentary channels. And my last video, I did a huge book haul and I promised I was going to do a book review for most, if not all of those books, most of those books, I should say, because some of them I was like, this might be a little bit above my level of understand. I might be being a little bit too ambitious. But today we are going to review Legendborn. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just doing a thumbnail. So we're going to review Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. First of all, before I get into that, let me pull up my notes. So if you see me looking down, you can kind of see it on my glasses. I'm looking at my tablet, which has all of my review information. I'm going to try to do a new format when I do this review. So most likely I'm going to do a bit where I sort of explain the book, give the synopsis, talk about what I like and didn't like versus like trying to give it a star review. I want to try to tell you, like, if you like these things, then this book is for you, right? Does that make sense? Okay. That being said, I'm going to sort of like do that, talk about the themes, talk about what I liked and didn't like to sort of give like a non-spoiler review in the beginning of my video. And then the rest will be spoilers because, you know, my reviews are not spoiler free, unfortunately, babes. And I'll probably put timestamps showing like where the spoiler is gonna start. But for the spoiler review free section, let's get started. Let me unlock my tablet. So that being said, this book is basically about a girl named Bree Matthews, who again is Black female protagonist. Technically Brianna Matthews, and this entire book, it's so weird for me personally to basically like talk about a female protagonist that has the same name as me. So hey girl, hey, how you doing? But yeah, so her name is Bree Matthews, and basically she ends up going off to college, and specifically an accelerated program. I forget what it's called. I wrote it down somewhere. But basically, if you don't know what an accelerated program is, it's basically like you finish high school early and then you get to like go to college and take some college courses in order to sort of get through college faster. Does that make sense? So like basically you're like a really smart kid that is just, you know, too smart for school, so you graduate early. She, I believe, is about 16 in this, so there's that. Which we're going to talk about a little bit, but just keep that in mind. Her and her friend, Alice Chin. The problem, though, is that Bree's mother passed away recently. And so, like, a lot of it is, like, grief and her grieving her mom. And then she finds out that basically, like, this magical world exists. And there are these magic users and, like, demons. And she thinks it's all connected to her mom's death. So she starts to basically insert herself into this, like, magic group, if that makes sense, to like figure out like how all of this is connected to her mom's death, because her mom also like was a magic user, and we'll get into all of that. But that's like the bare bones minimum of the book. And she works with this guy named Nick, who's like helping her. Okay, so couple content warnings that I'm going to go over that I'll probably repeat a couple times. But some content warnings for this book would be talks of abuse, death, and mentions of sexual assault. I will say when it goes over the sexual assault, it's not necessarily like very like overly graphic or violent, which is stuff that usually triggers me. But it is mentioned. There's also the whole like situation of like children that were born out of sexual assault. So just keep those things in mind. If those things are too intense for you, I understand. I get it. And when I talk about abuse, I'm talking about there is like physical abuse, but it's not really like domestic violence. There is some like emotional abuse going on and stuff like that. So again, keep all of that in mind. If that's not your cup of tea, if that's not your rodeo, I totally understand. Okay, so for this book, I'm just going to talk about some of the things that like it has that like if you're interested in would be really good for you. So obviously if you're interested in a book that features a Black female protagonist, this book would be for you. The book also does take place in the South, particularly in where's the school she goes to? University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So, which I think the author did graduate from. But if you're into that, if you're into like very like South and like Southern stuff, this is also for you. I'm from the city, so like not particularly my cup of tea, but like more power to you. A huge thing in this book is the Arthurian. I hope I'm saying it correctly. Arthurian as in King Arthur and the knights and all of that lore, like all of that. The magic system is based off of that and that mythology. I don't know if you can call it mythology, but it's based off of that essentially. So that system is a very prominent part of the book, and I have like read reviews and like people online saying like, oh, I love Arthurian systems and blah 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 blah, and I'm so happy to see that. So if you're into that, you would also like this. If you're okay, hear me out. If you're into fast romance, this book is also for you. So it's not insta love. There's no insta love, but like the characters do kind of like admit and accept their feelings for each other pretty early on in the book, and you're just like, oh, okay. And when I say fast romance, I mean like they probably got together like in the course of like maybe like a week or so, maybe 2 weeks, I would say. But like, yeah, it moves pretty quickly. There's also a love triangle. I know a lot of people moan and groan about love triangles. There's a love triangle. I think that for me, it's bearable. I don't think that it's like unnecessary, you know, like I think I think it's done in a very interesting way, just because like it's not random, and like all three characters like know each other and are involved with each other in some way. So like, oh, I'm like, oh, okay, this makes sense, you know. Obviously there's a lot of themes around death and grief and mourning and da-da-da-da-da because of Bree's mother passing away, and a lot of it centering around her trying to figure out the death related to her mom. There's also the aspect of, even though yes, these are like 16-year-old kids and like a bunch of like young adults, there's still like family involvement, at least on Bree's end. Like her dad is like very much so involved in the story. If you're into that sort of thing, I am not, but if you're into that sort of thing, you know, there's that. Because I know there's a lot of books that are saying like, where are their parents? All these kids are running around doing all this crazy stuff and there's no parents. So the dad is involved. A little bit too much in my opinion, but involved. So there's that. And then there's also a lot of talk, because Bree is Black, there's a lot of talk about like racism and prejudice and like all of that, which if you're into that, more power to you. I found it a little bit exhausting because me personally, I kind of like, when I want to read stuff, yes, I do want like a Black main protagonist, but I want a break from all of that sometimes, you get what I'm saying? So like sometimes I'm just like, I'm not in the mental capacity to really be like, okay, let's talk about, you know, let's go over racism and our history and blah, 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 and slavery and antebellum era. And I'm like, oh my God, okay, we're doing this. Which I mean, on one hand, I recognize that that's like a privilege to have. But then on another hand, I'm like, you know, some days you just don't want to think about that, you know? Like, it's so depressing and, like, you're just not in the mood to be, like, depressed. Whatever. That's just me, okay? That's just me, personally. That's my whole thing. Okay, cool. Got it. So if you like any of those things, this book is basically for you. What else can I say? So I'm gonna now go over basically what I liked and what I didn't like, and then we'll move into pretty much the spoilers because I have a lot to say almost every step of the way. Okay? So what I did like about the book is that I loved, oh my God, I love Selwyn Kane. I love Selwyn Kane. Ooh, girl, let me tell you something. I love me. Let me tell you something. I love me some Selwyn Kane, okay? So Selwyn Kane is a main character, but he's also like one of the legs of the love triangle pretty much. And he gets introduced before like Nick does. I'm pretty sure he gets introduced very early on, like page 7 or something like that. And Selwyn Kane is sort of like, he's very like gloomy. He's very like kind of like emo white boy almost, which is totally my type, but like dark hair, pale skin, like all of that 9 yards. He's very much so, I don't want to say like his magic is shadow work because it's really not, but like he very much so like moves in silence. He teleports around. He's working in the shadows, like behind the scenes. He's very like straightforward and to the point, very intense. And you know, I just love him. But also like I also like that he's really honest and he is there to like call Bree out when she's on some bullshit. Leading me into my next point, I also really like how people were holding the main protagonist accountable when she was on some bullshit, which I appreciate because I feel like that's not done enough in a lot of books, like especially in YA. Like, I don't know, I just feel like sometimes with the YA protagonists, especially the female ones, like they always just feel like they're justified in every single thing that they do, even when they're very obviously wrong. And like you're annoyed, but like none of the other characters are calling them out, and you're just like, they're very obviously on some bullshit. Like, why are we playing this game? You know, you get what I'm saying? So like, it was nice to see people just be like, listen, girl, let me tug on your coattail for a second. Here, let me tell you something. I did also enjoy, and these two things are probably like connected with each other, but I do enjoy how it was written, how the book was written in terms of like getting through the story in a cohesive manner. There were some flaws here and there that we'll get through, but like getting through the story in a cohesive manner is like a breeze. Like it's very nice to be like, oh, okay, this is happening and then that's happening and then this is happening. What stuff is happening? The lore, on the other hand, is a whole different story, but we're gonna get to that. But like getting through the events in the book was done really well, but also like the plot twists were also done really well because like it's done in a way like the hints are always there, and like sometimes you'll catch on before the character catches on, but then other times it's kind of like you can go back and be like, okay, this makes sense because of like why this person did this, because of this and blah 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 blah. Like you feel as though the plot points are justified, if that makes sense, and so that's really cool. Yeah, so let's get into what I did not like. Me personally, again, just in my opinion, I don't know why I'm giving all these disclaimers, but that's just me, okay? So a couple of things I did not like about the book, and I'm trying to be fair because I really like the book. It's not like I dislike it, but like, you know, I'm picky when it comes to my books sometimes. I know I am. I'm picky. So what I didn't like, y'all are gonna be so so surprised when I say this. I didn't really like Bree that much as the main character. I really didn't. Like there was just so many things that, which I'm trying to figure out how to get into without spoiling it, but like Bree, I'll just spoil it. Okay. So basically, one of the major flaws with Bree, which I read some like reviews on Goodreads after I read it, and like some people DNF the book because of this, but basically you find out that basically she's so obsessed with like trying to solve her mom's death and being angry that she died that she like doesn't focus on like her life or her memory or her legacy at all. It's just that like Bree walks around all the time that I'm so angry that she died and da 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 and blah 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 blah. Like she's just mad because she died. Like, but like she doesn't actually miss her mom. And that became like really old and really tired and really annoying. And like there were moments where like eventually like a character like called her out on it. But like you don't get to that point till like well half through the halfway point. And so like I think for people that maybe DNF'd it and didn't hit that point where like Bree was starting to get called out on her bullshit, that like I could see why people were like, no, I can't do this anymore, you know? There's also the aspect of like she like other people would kind of like talk to her about their tragic past or like their issues with their moms, and she would just be like, I don't care. And I'm saying like, so no one else can be sad about their moms except for you. Like it was just like I get it, like even for characters that she may not really like, which we'll get into, but like even for characters that she may not like or may not really get along with, like it was just so annoying to see her like just straight up be like, yeah, I don't care that you like that your mom is dead and you miss your mom. My mom is dead. And it's kind of like, girl, okay, you're so annoying. So besides that, there's also the fact of like, so throughout the book there's like there's this whole magic system, and like you have the knights who are like fighting for like, so the knights of the round table, right, with like the Arthurian thing, and then the knights kind of have their own like guards or knights that like fight for them, so they have like people that protect them, but like they're actively like fighting demons with like their magic and their weapons and stuff like that. But like Bree can't do any of that, right? Like she has magic, she doesn't know how to use it. And like she obviously has never been trained with a weapon before, which like I was like, okay, obviously like she's going to get there at some point, right? Like that's what the expectation is that like, oh, at some point she's going to get a hold of her powers. And like that moment never really comes. And so like it was just a little unjustified when people were like, oh, like I trust Bree with my life and da 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 da. And it's like, or like people sitting here like, you're so strong, Bree. And it's like, well, she's not physically strong because she doesn't know what she's doing. So are you trying to say that she's emotionally strong? Which like I could kind of see, but also like we've had the extensive conversation about like calling Black women strong just because. And like for Bree, someone who's like constantly outspoken about like all the racism and stuff that happens to her, like she doesn't say anything about that. And I'm like, what do we do? What's going on? I'm so confused. But no, it was just a little odd because like people were like, I don't know, I feel like she rose up to like, for like so many people to have great respect for her, when it's like, but why though? Or like when the time came for them to fight, like Bree would just stand at the sidelines and like not do anything. And you're kind of like, why is she even here? Like I get it, like some people didn't want her there, but it was kind of implied that they didn't want her there because she's like Black and a woman, and not because like she's useless whenever it comes to fighting. Like she's always either running away or she's just like standing there watching everybody else do stuff. And then like it was weird because people would constantly be like, oh, do you still want to do this? Like, are you still committed to this? And she'd be like, yeah. And it's so annoying because every single time, oh my God, every single time something happens, she would be like, oh, I'm determined and I'm going to do this and I'm going to stick with this and I bet. And then when the time came, she would be like, oh, I'm so scared. I want to run away. I don't want to do this anymore. It's like, pick one. Like, I get it. Like in the moment when like the demon is right in front of your face and like you're fighting and like people are getting hurt, like in the heat of battle, you can get kind of like scared. But it was just so annoying to like read her flip-flopping constantly between the two. And I'm like, and like everyone else is like constantly asking her like, are you sure you want to commit to this? Like every step of the way. And I'm like, why are y'all doing that? Like, maybe it's because like she seems very non-committal, but like every single time she says yes and then she comes back. Granted, she ran away twice, but I'm just kind of like, I don't know. Bree was like, I was so sick of Bree. I was so tired of her. I was so tired of her. Sorry, I'm just gonna leave it at that. So the next thing, which I mentioned earlier, is like all of the racism and prejudice, which okay, here comes the slippery slope, right? On one hand, I could totally see why someone, right, why the topic of like people being racist to Bree would happen, right? Like when you are black, it's gonna happen regardless, even if you try to pretend like it's not. Like you can try to ignore it, but like most black people, especially in America, obviously are going to go through some sort of racist experience. But like in this case, I'm kind of sitting here like, it just, sometimes it feels so random and disjointed that you can't tell like why it's in there in the first place. And I get it, like sometimes it doesn't, like when you experience racism as a person of color, particularly as a black person, you go through, like sometimes there's not a reason, there's no rhyme or reason to it, it just happens and you have to like move on, right? But in this situation, I was just kind of like, why did you add this to the book? Like why are we stopping the plot to like insert someone making a snide comment to her, or like, you know, whatever, like passive aggressive whatever bullshit. Like it just felt, I don't know, it just felt odd. And it's kind of like, did we really need to deal with this? Like I feel like we could have told a story without this, is just my main point. Like I'm like, we really did not need you get what I'm saying. But that's just me. I'm not trying to say that like it shouldn't be in there at all, but also like, I don't know, I just feel like for as many readers that are okay with it, there's just as many readers, myself included, who have been fighting for stories by black authors about black people doing regular things. And I've been saying it for the longest that like we need more stories of black people doing normal stuff without the conversation having to be centered around their race all the time. Like white people get plenty of stories all the time where it's not centered around their whiteness or them being white. Why can't we have the same thing? Like, why can't we have an escape? But, you know, black people can never escape. They always have to be reminded in everything about our past and about slavery and about blah, 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 blah. And, like, I get it. Like, again, it's probably a privilege to be able to forget your history and, like, not acknowledge it. But, like, at some point, and this doesn't really have to do with this book, but at some point, like, the whole reason why black people want to escape from dealing, you know, reading or having to look at racism in movies, in books, in TV shows, and whatever, is because at some point it's just misery porn. Like, no one wants to constantly look at misery all the time. And I think that, like, eventually one day we'll get there, but, like, we're not quite there yet. I'm glad and I'm happy to see a book that has, like, a black female protagonist, but I'm just tired that we still have to constantly, like, include topics of, like, racism and prejudice in it. And again, the author can do whatever she wants with her story. If that's something that was really important to her, I mean, obviously I'm not going to tell her how to write her book, but it just seems like, you know, it would have been nice to have an experience without that. But again, if that's what's important to her, then that's what's important to her. More power to you. Okay. What else I did not like was Bree and Nick's romance. Oh my God. So here's the double-edged sword. On one hand, the attraction was there, right? Because I've read books where, like, you look at two characters and, like, they're attracted to each other, but you just don't feel the attraction in a weird sense. The attraction was there. Okay, they were attracted to each other and it was believable and all that good stuff. But, like, I don't know how to describe it. I just feel like, I don't know, it just moved way too fast, right? Like, it went from Bree having a crush on him to, like, immediately, like, oh, like, Nick also likes her, and they're kind of playing the cat and mouse game of, like, neither of them quite admitting it, and then Nick was like, I like you. And I want to be with you. And like Bree was like flabbergasted, and then they were just kind of like together at some point, which is fine and cute. I actually enjoyed that, but I just feel like I'm just not a fan of I'm a huge fan of slow romance, so I was just like okay. And I also like couldn't understand, I guess I couldn't figure out why Bree liked him. Not to say that like she needs a reason, but she just came across as a person that's like not really interested in anyone and like didn't really care. And then like all of a sudden she was like, oh, but he's really cute and he's this golden puppy boy and blah 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 blah. And then all of a sudden she liked him, and I was like, okay. One thing I absolutely hated was the nicknames throughout the book. I am so sick. I am so tired of the nicknames. If nothing else, the nicknames, I was over the like it felt like every single person had to have nicknames, and the nicknames, and I'm so sorry about it, but like the nicknames just felt like white girl nicknames, which like white girl nicknames the inside joke, it's an inside joke between me and my friend, but like white girl nicknames is basically like when someone takes like shortens your name and says a short part of your name, which like some names you just have to do that too. Like with Brianna, it's Bree, but like everybody had to have a nick, and I'm just like Selwyn was Sel, and then Nicholas was Nick, and then like Victoria had to be Tor. And I was like, oh my god, if one more person has a nickname, I'm going to fucking scream. I went away with the nicknames. I don't want the nicknames anymore. I think it's because like everyone having a nickname thing just felt very like it felt very like I'm reading a fan fiction right now, you know? Like I'm back in the early 2010s, and I'm on my little phone on AO3 on fanfiction.net, and I'm reading a fanfic right now. And it just gave like, it gave very much so that vibe, and not like, oh, this is a published work vibe. But I don't know. Me personally, I was sick of it. But like, there's probably somebody who was into it. I hated it. It overstayed its welcome. Not every character to me needed to have a nickname. Okay, the world building. Oh girl, let me tell you something. Let me tell you something, and let me tell you something good. Okay, listen. As someone who does not know the system for Arthurian magic or Arthurian system, like Arthurian world building, like it's very confusing, and like the world building gets like, it's not explained well. And I'm not the type of person that like, I usually typically don't like fantasy because I don't like world building it, and I don't like trying to like keep up with like all of the like rules and regulation. Like I'm just not that person. I'm not that person. Like I know that there are people who like take world building very seriously and want to know like every last thing about your world down to like the waste management and da 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 da. But I'm just, me personally, I'm not that person. I want very light magic fantasy system, if at all. And I was like, okay, this is like kind of like, it's not a high fantasy, but it is a fantasy, and like I could probably like wrap my head around it. If I can get into it, you can get into it. But like as someone who is not as familiar with the Arthurian thing, it just didn't make sense. And I think it's also because like a lot of the characters also weren't introduced very well, because like a character would be introduced and like we would kind of understand them, and like even though their names are mentioned like several times throughout the book, like they just, I don't know why, but names and faces just don't stick until like the end. And I'm like, okay, I know Tor, but I don't remember shit about Tor. And like I know Fitz, and I know Vaughn, and I know like there's like names that you constantly like, you know those names, but you don't like remember any facts about them. You don't remember what they look like. You don't remember, but like you know they exist. It's kind of like that. And like it gets very detailed because it's like, oh, each night person, we'll talk about official titles in a bit, but it's supposed to be set up like each night has like their own night. Each night of the 12 nights has their own kind of like magic user scion, whatever you want to say, that basically defends them. And it was very difficult because there are so many characters to be like, okay, each scion is oathed to a knight, and you're kind of sitting here like, okay, this person is oathed to that person, and then that person is oathed to this person, and then this person is oath to that, and it's like, girl, I'm not keeping up. I'm not gonna lie. When I read it, I was like, I'm not keeping up. I'm not keeping up with who's who. It went through one ear straight out the other. I was like, this means nothing to me. So again, which is not a critique that I haven't heard from other reviews. Again, I did read and look at and watch a lot of reviews that were basically like, yeah, the world building is like, it's a learning curve. And then the last thing I'm going to put in here are the trials. And listen, I don't claim to be a perfect reader. Okay? I don't claim to be the perfect reader. I claim to be a decent reader and a subpar reader, if you will. Yeah. But I claim to be like a subpar reader, right? And like sometimes I read things and like it completely escapes. Like I didn't register nothing you just explained to me. And sometimes I have to like go back and reread stuff. And for some reason, and I'm not trying to spoil too much, but for some reason there was like this whole thing about like they have this society for the knights, and like they have to decide like if the scions are strong enough, right, to be oathed or whatever. And so they do these trials. But like when they talk about the trials, it's kind of like in passing where Bree is like, yeah, they like, there's these trials, but like they sped it up. It's supposed to be over the course of like a year. And then they sped it up to like 6 months because like there's a reason for it. I'll explain it sometime later. But like they speed it up to 6 months, and then they speed it up again to like 3 months, and then they speed it up even more. And I'm like, okay, so like if they're speeding up the trials, like do you really even need to drag it out for like a year? But that being said, like it just wasn't, like I feel like we didn't get introduced to it very well. It was just like, oh, the trials are happening now. And you're like, what are the trials though? Like what are we looking for? What did the trials prove? And like there's 3 trials, but then you like some of the trials aren't really even explained, and then some trials are explained like what they have to do, but like it's not really explained like, okay, why are we doing these trials? What does this prove? What does this show? And it like doesn't, I don't know. It was really weird. Like one trial was like, oh, they have to like escort these mannequins to safety. And it's like, okay, but like why? Like are we testing their strength? Are we testing dexterity? Are we testing magical ability, physical prowess? Like what are we testing? What are we looking for? What are they proving? And like that was never established, which is why I tend not to really like the whole like trials and tests in these like fantasy or like dystopian like books, because I'm like, but what are you looking for? What are we proving? What are we searching for? What's the point? And like I don't think we ever got that. It was just like, yeah, we have to do these trials because we have to do them. And you're like, okay, trials are happening now. And like even like explaining the trials wasn't really like a thing. It was just like, yeah, the scions have to do a trials. Like the young scions have to do trials. And you're like, okay. Okay, that about wraps up everything so far. So I'm just going to give you my overall thoughts of the book before I get into like the spoiler bits. And I hopefully I don't, but knowing myself, I know I'm going to probably like add something on it all the way at the end when I've like gone over beginning to end. But yeah, so like pretty much like besides those things, I really liked, it's weird because I liked the book and I liked the writing of the book. I didn't like the world building. I didn't really even like the main protagonist. Girl, I really was so sick of Bree. There were it's weird because there were times where I'm like, I really like Bree, and then there was times where I'm like, I'm sick of you, girl. And then there are times where I'm like, oh, she's getting called out on her bullshit. But then there's like other times where like characters would like coddle her, and I'm like, don't do that. And I think that's pretty much all the like major things. I also know that this book is apparently supposed to be the first book in a trilogy, and like I know the second book is out. I don't think the third book has been like, I think she's still writing the third book, which is not quite out yet. So I haven't decided if I'm going to read the third book or not. Bear with me. But I mean, the third book, I haven't really decided if I'm going to go on and read the second book or not. I'm kind of tempted only because I really like Selwyn Kane. But it depends. That being said, I think that's it. It's a pretty good read if, again, you're into the things that I mentioned earlier. And if you like if none of those things are really going to bother you and you're able to deal with Bree as a character, then this book is all for you. Go wild, go crazy.